Panic mode. Carney desperate for Harper's help as Brookfield power grab sparks national uproar. Mark Carney's short-lived political honeymoon imploded just weeks after winning the April 2025 snap election. Instead of consolidating power, he's facing a national crisis linked to his former employer, Brookfield Asset Management. Their aggressive acquisitions have sparked outrage, raising serious conflict of interest concerns. In a shocking twist, Carney has reportedly turned to ex-conservative PM Stephen Harper for advice, an act viewed by many as a sign of desperation, plunging the country into what critics are calling full-blown panic mode. Brookfield's high-speed takeover of strategic assets, green energy, real estate, infrastructure has triggered emergency parliamentary sessions and online uproar. Though Carney claims no financial ties remain, his past role at Brookfield casts a long shadow. Accusations are flying that the government is passively enabling the company's corporate expansion under the guise of sustainability. The public sees a PM entangled with a private giant that's tightening its grip on Canada's economic foundations, and the political fallout is proving inescapable. Carney's outreach to Harper, a figure once vilified by Liberals, has blindsided both parties. What might have been seen as bipartisan pragmatism is instead viewed as an alarming sign of instability. Critics say Carney is panicking, turning to a former adversary as his government teeters under scandal. The optics are damaging, a Liberal Prime Minister accused of corporate favoritism now consulting the architect of free market conservatism. For many, this symbolizes a government losing control before it ever found its footing. Public anger has spilled into the streets, with protests erupting outside Brookfield offices in major cities. Activists and Indigenous groups accuse the company of exploiting environmental agendas to seize land and energy resources with minimal oversight. Inside Parliament, Carney's cabinet is divided. Some want immediate distance from Brookfield, others fear that would confirm guilt. The absence of decisive leadership is intensifying the backlash, fueling a growing sense that the government is paralyzed in the face of crisis. Inside Parliament, opposition leaders are sharpening their knives. The Conservatives, still reeling from their narrow election loss, have found new energy in the scandal. They're accusing Carney of betraying his promise of transparency and ethical leadership. The Bloc Québécois and NDP have echoed those concerns, demanding a full ethics review into Carney's past ties to Brookfield and immediate parliamentary hearings on the scope and legality of Brookfield's recent acquisitions. The Liberals, governing in a fragile minority, are watching their alliances with smaller parties begin to crack. Confidence in the new government is eroding quickly, and some insiders are warning that a snap no-confidence vote is not out of the question. Supporters of Carney argue that the Prime Minister's move to contact Harper is less about desperation and more about statesmanship. They say it reflects a willingness to reach across ideological divides during a time of uncertainty. Carney, known internationally for his economic expertise, is leaning on experience wherever he can find it. After all, Harper, for all his critics, led Canada through the 2008 financial crisis and maintained investor confidence. From this view, Carney's actions are not those of a man panicking, but of a leader trying to steady the ship by calling on veterans of past storms. Yet even many Liberals admit privately that it's a hard sell to the base. For critics, the Brookfield scandal is bigger than politics. It's about democracy and public trust. They argue that Canada cannot afford a prime minister whose career path through central banking and corporate boardrooms leaves him vulnerable to perceived or real conflicts of interest. The urgency of the climate crisis, the housing crunch, and economic uncertainty makes it all the more dangerous when one company is allowed to accumulate so much influence. The fact that Brookfield has benefited from government subsidies and favorable regulatory conditions only deepens the public's suspicion. Opposition MPs are now questioning whether recent policy decisions, from infrastructure funding to carbon credits, were influenced by corporate interests masquerading as public good. The uproar has revealed a deepening fracture within the Liberal Party itself. Younger MPs and grassroots members, many of whom campaigned on progressive platforms of housing reform, Indigenous justice, and anti-corporate accountability, are demanding distance from Brookfield. Some are even calling for a leadership review, concerned that Carney's reputation as a global elite technocrat is politically toxic in the current populist climate. What was once Carney's greatest asset, his experience in global finance, now risks becoming his Achilles heel. Meanwhile, premiers across the country are stepping into the fray. Ontario and British Columbia have raised concerns about Brookfield's growing control over energy utilities and its potential to manipulate regional pricing structures. Alberta officials have criticized what they see as favoritism toward large green energy conglomerates at the expense of local industries. Even Quebec, often cautious to avoid federal entanglements, is demanding transparency on land use and Indigenous consultation. With public services and provincial infrastructure increasingly under corporate contracts, the fear is that Canada is quietly slipping into a privatized policy regime without democratic oversight. Carney, for his part, has tried to frame the crisis in more personal terms. In public addresses, he's spoken about the challenges of modern governance, the pressures of leadership, and the importance of integrity. He insists that he has no ongoing ties to Brookfield and that his government will never put private gain above public good. But these assurances have done little to calm the storm. Canadians want more than words. They want accountability. Many are demanding a formal inquiry, full divestment from any Brookfield-linked interests, and a moratorium on corporate government partnerships until public trust is rebuilt. As the scandal deepens, Carney's government is slipping in the polls. The public is wary, the opposition is emboldened, and the backroom negotiations with Harper, whatever their purpose, remain a mystery that continues to haunt Carney's image. The Liberals, once hopeful of a post-Trudeau revival, are now navigating uncharted waters with a leader some fear is too tied to the financial elite to understand the anxieties of everyday Canadians. What began as a promise of technocratic renewal is veering dangerously close to political implosion. Panic mode, Carney, desperate for Harper's help as Brookfield power grab sparks national uproar, captures a moment of high-stakes political drama where perception and power collide. Mark Carney is learning that leadership in the digital age is not only about economic policy or international stature, it's about authenticity, trust, and humility. Whether he can weather this storm or whether the Brookfield scandal becomes the defining crisis of his leadership remains uncertain. But one thing is clear: Canada is watching, and patience is in short supply.